moving forward with our game, let us add our background to our game. So I'm going to click here in our sprites, backgrounds, and I'm going to drag this first background and place it here. And I'm going to set it at 0, 0 for the position. Now, before we see how can we actually make this a larger background, what I want to do is, you have probably noticed that our cloud and our player are behind our background. There are a couple of ways that we can fix this. First, we can move or play with the Z position of our game background. So we see when we set the Z position at 2, then we see our player and our ground or our cloud. But I'm not going to do that. I'm going to set it back at 0. Here for the sprite renderer component in the inspector panel, we see that we have these sorting layers and we have the default sorting layer. We can click on this add sorting layer and we can add here new sorting layers by clicking on this plus button. So here I can say, for example, background, and here I can say, for example, foreground. But we can say here player or sky or clouds, collectible items, so on and so forth, but this is just for the example that I want to show you now. So when I click on the background, we have the default, the background, and the foreground. So the sorting layer that's here, or the first one here for foreground, will be rendered on top of our background and on top of the default sorting layer. Our background is going to be rendered on top of the default sorting layer but behind the foreground. And in order to demonstrate this, I'm going to set the game background on our background sorting layer, but I'm going to set the player at the foreground sorting layer, and now we see the player here. If I set the player at the default, he is behind our background because background is set at background, which is rendered on top of the default sorting layer. If, however, I set it at foreground, then we have the player rendered on top of the background. We are not going to use this type of sorting layer also, so I'm going to set it back at default, and I'm going to go here and delete these sorting layers. This is just one of the ways how can we fix it. The last way is that we can use this order in layer. It works the same way as sorting layer, but it works for the specific sorting layer. So we have here the default sorting layer, and our player is set on the default, and so is our cloud. But if we use our order in layer, so the element that's at order 0 will be rendered behind the element that's at order 1. So the element that's at order 1 will be rendered on top of element that's in order 0. So if I select the player and set his order in layer to be 1, notice now our player is going to be visible here. So I'm going to set our clouds to be at order in layer 1 and hit apply, so you can do the same thing for our other clouds. I'm going to go here in our cloud prefabs and select cloud 2, 3, and dark cloud, set their order in layer 1. And for the player, I'm going to set the order in layer 2 and hit apply. And both of these are going to be rendered on top of the background because background is set at order in layer 0. And now let us create our other backgrounds. For that, I'm going to create an empty game object and I'm going to name it backgrounds. Set the position at 0, 0, which is really important, so 0, 0, and drag this game background as the child of our backgrounds. Now, in order to create multiple backgrounds, I'm simply going to copy this one, and now we have another separate background. I'm going to position it on top here, move it a little bit, and I'm going to zoom in and use a snap tool and simply hold the V key on your keyboard, and you see now that we have these coordinates at the corner of our image. If I hold the V key, we can have it on any corner where we are pointing with our mouse. So again, I'm going to zoom in, I'm going to hold the V key, and now while holding, so remember, holding the V key on the keyboard, I can click here and snap it. So simply drag it and snap it here on this other background, and this will give us an effect of a single image, which will simulate an infinite background. So we are going to do the same thing now. I'm simply going to duplicate this one and position it below it. So here, and again, I'm going to zoom in a little bit, hold the V key, snap it to our background. Of course, you can zoom in and see if there are any gaps. If you see any gaps, you can, well, simply position it a little bit better and snap it again. And I'm going to duplicate it one more time and simply position it here. Zoom in, hold the V key and snap it to each other. And I'm going to do it one more time. So again, position it here. So this is what we have. And I'm going to go and zoom in a little bit more like this, hold the V key and snap it to the background that's above it. So we have how many backgrounds? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So this is going to be enough. If we see the need for more, we can simply duplicate the last one and we can simply, well, reposition it. One other thing that we need to do is we need to select all of our backgrounds and we need to add a box collider. So filter for the box collider on them and add a box collider on our backgrounds. This is because we are going to move them by using colliders, and for that we need to apply colliders so that we can detect collision. Also here for our layers, here we have these layers and we see that our game backgrounds are set at default layers. We are going to click on this add layer and here we are going to add a BG layer. So simply type BG and I'm going to select all of our backgrounds and I'm going to add them to the BG layer. What this can do now is that we can go in our edit and then project settings and then physics 2D and here we have these layers and we can uncheck this checkbox and we can only check it for BG to collide with the BG because we don't want the player to collide with our background, which is on layer BG. And we also don't want our clouds to collide with the background, which are also set on player BG, but they are set at layer default. So we can simply go under Edit, Project Settings, Physics 2D, and we can uncheck these checkboxes and only leave the checkbox for the BG. This will mean that the layer or any game object that's set on the layer BG can only collide with a game object that's set on that same layer, so BG layer. Meaning our backgrounds can only collide with each other and also with our background collectors that we are going to create a little bit later, and they are going to collect our backgrounds. But we have set this up. Now what we need to do is we need to go in our assets folder, scripts folder, and create, or excuse me, I lost my voice a little bit for a second, and create a background scripts folder. Inside of that folder, create a BG scalar script, and we need to attach it for each of our game background. So simply select all of them, go under add component and filter for the BG scalar and click on it, and it will be, well, automatically added to each of our game object. And now simply double click it so MonoDevelop will open our BG scalar here. Now inside of our BG scalar script, we are going to delete the update function because we are not going to need it, and I'm also going to delete this comment. Here we are going to scale our script to fit the width of our camera, because if I go now here and run the game, so if I press play, this is what we see. We don't want these blue gaps on the side. We want our background to fill the screen of our camera. And for that here in the start function, I'm going to create a sprite render, which I'm going to name SR, is equal to get component sprite render component from our game object, which is if I select the game background, this is the sprite render, which renders our sprite in the screen. So we are going to get that component, and here I'm going to create a vector 3, which I'm going to name temp scale is equal to transform.local scale, because we are going to alter the scale's X position. So if I touch it, we are going to alter it like this in order to resize this background to fit our camera. And for that, we are getting this local scale. I'm also going to create here a float, which is going to be the width of our sprite, and it's equal to sprite render dot sprite dot bounds dot size, or excuse me, not border, so it's bounds dot size dot x. This is going to give me the size or the width of our sprite. So the width of our sprite is going to be given by using bounds size x. Now I'm going to create a float variable, and I'm going to name it world screen or world height, which is going to calculate the world height. And here in our Unity, this what we see here, these are world. This is the world space in Unity. So the world height is actually from here where I'm pointing with my mouse. So on top of the camera to the bottom of the camera. This is the world height. So the height is represented by the camera. And how can we get that? Well, we can get that by using camera.main.orthographic size, which is, if I go back and select the main camera, this is the size of that camera. So this is the orthographic size of the camera. If we multiply that size by 2, we are going to get the world height. And now we need the width. And we can get the width by typing float, and we are going to say world height. So world height, so height, and we need to multiply it by screen.width. So screen width, let me just type it right. So screen width, what's the problem here? So world height, excuse me, world width is equal to world height multiplied by screen.width divided by screen.height. So screen.width is going to give us the width of our screen, and screen.height is going to give us the height of the screen when we run the game. So width is going to give us this right here, and height is going to give us this right here. In order to calculate the world width, which is from here up to here, what we need to do is we need to use the world height and multiply that by screen width divided by screen height. And now in order to determine the scale of our sprite here, so of the background, what we need to do is we need to simply say here float x is equal to, or simply I can say here temp.scale or temp scale x is equal to, and what we need to do is we need to divide our world width. So let me just go here. So world width divided by the width that we have calculated here. And now we can simply say transform local scale is equal to temp scale, again reassigning it back to our background or to our scale. Now we can actually test this out. But before we do that, I've noticed that I made one mistake and we need to correct it. So is this line of code here. So we are going to use world height divided by screen.height multiplied by screen.width. So in order to get the world width, which if I go back is the width of the camera. So if I select the camera, so it's this point from here up to here. So the width of the camera, that's our world width. We need to get that by using world height, which we have calculated here, dividing that by screen height multiplying by screen.width. And everything else is the same. So we are going to use our temp scale x is equal to world width divided by our width here and reassigning that to our actual scale. So if we go back here, now we can test it out. Last time when we ran the game, here we had these gaps. So now if I run the game, we are not going to see those gaps which we see here. So we see that our backgrounds, all of them have scaled, but we don't have those gaps anymore. If I rerun the game again, we see the backgrounds have scaled and we don't have those gaps anymore. So we saw actually in action how our backgrounds are rescaling. So if I rerun the game now again, we saw how our backgrounds have rescaled to fill in our camera size, and that way we are not going to have those gaps on the side. This is one of the ways how can we support multiple screen resolution. So no matter how the size or which the size of our camera is going to be. So now I'm setting the size or the reference resolution, or excuse me, the resolution to be 720 by 1280. If I rerun the game, they are going to rescale as we just saw here to fit our camera again. If I set, for example, the size of the camera to be 6, which is even larger, if I run the game, we see that our backgrounds have resized and again fit in the camera's size. So I can put it back at 5 again, and here change it back to 480. And this is how can we scale our backgrounds.